My name is Sylvia Johnson, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Sunday school lesson for Sunday, May the 19th. The title for Sunday, May the 19th is Jesus' Mission on Earth. Bible basis is Luke, the 4th chapter, the 14th through the 21st verse. Our Bible truth: our mission on earth should be the same as Christ. Memory verse: and he began to say unto them, this day is the scripture fulfilled in your ears. Luke, the 4th chapter, the 21st verse, and that's your King James Version. The lesson aims for Sunday, May the 19th are, by the end of the lesson, we will understand the particular significance of what Jesus read in the synagogue at Nazareth. Be motivated to explore our spiritual gifts and consider what God may want us to do with our lives, and create a list of spiritual gifts with ways that God can use each of these gifts. So, hi everyone. Welcome to today's Sunday School Review. I read I read the subject and the verses of this lesson, and I was like, okay, the 14th through 21st verse, it's just 7 or 8 verses. This is going to be easy. Then I read it, and I was like, okay. So there's, as usual, a lot of great detail here, and we're going to have a really good discussion. And make sure to chime in the comments if you have a question or something that you would like to share with the group as well. As I am studying the lesson, I tend to see it a lot in everyday life, and I'm thankful for that because it helps me understand and apply it, and it really helps what the word is speaking to stick. And so I decided that I'm gonna try something new this week, and I've thought about it multiple times, but I don't want to make the videos too long. So at the end of the lesson, I'm going to give a testimony that is applicable to the topic, and it may or may not necessarily be like something that's going on with me, but like I said, I want the message to stick. I want you to remember what the word is teaching. And I think the little portion of life application would be very helpful in that. I mean, of course, we all like to hear good teaching and we like to, listen to other people. But, if you can make it familiar and known to you in a personal way, I think that would help in the teaching and so on. And so if you just want to hear what the Sunday school review is, I will do all of that first. And then if you want to keep going, I'll share a little Sylvia's life application portion at the end, and hopefully it won't be too long. But if you just want to hear the lesson, you can pop off. So if that works for you and you enjoy that this week, leave me a note, let me know, and we'll just keep trying it out. So without further ado, we'll get into today's lesson. So this lesson picks up in chronologically following the sequence of events from last week's lesson when Jesus was tempted by the enemy after fasting in the wilderness. And so he leaves that point and goes on to work in his purpose. And so our lesson picks up at Luke, the 4th chapter and the 14th verse. And I'm going to read the first 2 verses from the lesson. And it says, and Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit into Galilee, and there went out a fame of him through all the region round about, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. Now, after Jesus faced his temptation, it says he returned. So he went back to the region from which he was from, and he begins to work. And he's teaching in the synagogues. And so a couple of things to note from this is, one, he was in the power of the Spirit. So after his temptation, Jesus was strengthened. After defeating that round of enemy interaction, the power of the Spirit was with him to do what it is that God had sent him to do. So many times we succumb to our temptation. We fall to the temptation when we face the enemy, and that weakens us in the spirit. That makes us less capable of performing what the will of God is, because we have indulged the flesh and not strengthened the spirit. Jesus had done the opposite of that. And so he demonstrates where his power comes from, right? Because he did not give way to the devil and allow him to convince him to accept any of his tempting. He followed what God wanted him to do and was strengthened. And from there, we just need to remember that, God's will not be glorified in our flesh. So Jesus moves forward in his ministry, and this fame begins because he's working in the spirit. And he's working where he is. He is working, and it's very interesting because sometimes when we feel anointed or that we've been called to a purpose, we always want to go straight to the top. Like right now, like I'm literally sitting in my dining room talking to you, right? But sometimes we try to go too far. There's a reason why the Lord had him start where he was. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as he begins to read in the next couple of verses. So remember, God's will doesn't look like what our ambitions are or what our plan is, right? So this was the deliverer. We know that now. He didn't go storming the gates saying, let my people go. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the way Moses did it. He did it the way the Lord told him to do it. But that was also the expectation that the children of Israel had at that time, was that their deliverer was going to come and was going to defeat in battle and, come in and be a glorious king in the way that men think kings should be. And so God had started out his king in a totally different way. So, what is Jesus doing? Well, it says he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. So the synagogues were a place of teaching. And to this day, Jewish people still gather and they get their teaching and they participate in worship in the synagogues. And so now you have Jewish people who are dispersed. And when I say now, I mean in the lesson now, the current time in the lesson. You have Jewish people who have been dispersed because they have all been exiled. And even though some people had returned to Jerusalem, many people had not. And so you have these synagogues or these worship centers set up in different places. And here he is visiting one. And you see that he teaches there. And so what's he teaching? Well, he's teaching the scripture. He is bringing to understanding the word of God. And so that's another thing to think about, what it is that Jesus is doing, because we focus on all the miracles and those are great, but we focus on all the miracles and what he's doing from place to place to place. And you see it all throughout his ministry is bringing people to an understanding, to help them get to know the God they say they serve, to know his will, to see what his desire is for their lives, to help them understand what he's been doing throughout their history. So he's teaching. And if we pick up in the 16th verse, and he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. So Jesus goes back to the synagogue where he was brought up, and he gets up to read. Now, in the synagogues, they read the scrolls. Now, it says in your Bible, the translation is the book. But remember that there was no printing press. Everything was handwritten then, and they were written on scrolls and rolled up. And that's how they learned the law. That's how they learned teaching. Remember, we looked at, I believe it was Deuteronomy a couple of weeks ago, when it talked about how you should study the law and how you should keep it as a frontlet before your eyes. They were religious, meaning in their structured practice at studying this. And so the way to remember it, because everybody didn't have books and copies and things, was to go to the synagogue and to hear it read. And so men could get up and read from a scroll. And Jesus read from what we know now in the Bible as Isaiah 61. And there's a significance as to why he read this. So the book of Isaiah is one of the major prophets. And Isaiah wrote of times that were to come. So he writes of the judgment, of the captivity, the fall of Judah and Israel. And these things don't happen till later, but he also writes of the hope of the Messianic king. And he writes of the redemption of the people. He writes these promises of God. And so Jesus is reading from that part of the book. And what's he saying in this part of the book? So I took it out and I pieced out some of these words so that we could get a better understanding of the scriptures that he read. So it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. So the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, okay? The Spirit of the Lord is with me, okay? And I've been anointed, I'm marked, I am consecrated, I am selected by God. And it says to preach. And so that preaching, if you think of it in the sense of how it's written, not how we necessarily see it today, but it can still be very much like this today. Think of a person proclaiming or a herald. If you watch movies that are period pieces, that herald would come down the street calling out something, announcing something that people needed to know. Back then, no internet, no newspaper print, no 6 o'clock news. If you wanted something known, you had to go outside and shout it. Okay? And so there's someone calling out something. And what is it that they're calling out? The gospel, the good news. So the herald is bringing out an announcement of something that's good. And he's not just good, but he's declaring it as and stating it as a truth, right? It is not as they use today, fake news. Okay, he is proclaiming to the outward facing a truth, and it's important to note that when you herald something, or when you proclaim and declare something, you're not doing it for yourself. You're speaking it to something or someone. Your intention is for it to be known by others. And so the Spirit of the Lord has marked him to deliver this message that is declared as truth, that's good news. And who's he delivering it to? It says the poor, which takes me back to the point about Jesus starting where he was, going back to where he was. Nazareth wasn't the high and mighty place. It was not a vacation destination. It was not where the up and coming were living. Okay. He's bringing a declaration of truth that is good news, not to the VIPs, not to the political powers, not to the high and mighty. He's bringing good news to the poor, to the less than, to the downtrodden, to the hurt and the lowly. And so God has anointed him or marked him to bring an announcement to people who appear to not be worth the announcement. Okay. And the next part says, he hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted. So again, declaring that God has put him to this purpose. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted. Healing as in make whole. Healing as in bringing it back together. The heart in the Bible is not just my precious tender emotions. Your heart is the center of your being. It is where your will and your intentions and your emotions reside, okay? And so if my heart is broken, what does that say about who I am as a person? My moral compass doesn't always point due north. My thinking and my perspective is jaded. Yes, I am hurt and I'm probably hurting others. And so I'm incomplete. And I am not receiving the benefit of the good life with God because I probably don't even understand or recognize it, right? And so I'm dealing with a lot of negativity and consequences in my life because my thinking is flawed. And so God has sent him to heal that, to make that whole, to fix that brokenness, that crushed heart. I, with my teeny boppers at church, I have a saying, and it's before you speak, be wise, be smart. It's hard to fix a crumpled heart, and there's like a heart that you have, and you wrinkle it up with paper. And then after you wrinkle up a piece of paper, I'm not gonna waste paper right now, but I'm gonna do it for the demo. Okay, after you crush a piece of paper, it's hard to get it back smooth. I can flatten it out all I want to, but it's hard to get it back smooth. So when you think about God sending Jesus to heal the broken heart, he was gonna fix it. Like where I can't smooth this out and to get it back in its right place, God sent Jesus to do that. He can do that. He can make it like that brokenness was never there, that crushed, wrinkled, papery mess that I've got right here. He can fix it back like it was never there. So next it says to preach deliverance to the captives. Okay. To preach, again, we're heralding. Hey. Okay. We're crying out in the streets. We're crying out to the masses. We're speaking to these people. So we've got poor, brokenhearted, and captives. And we're preaching deliverance to the captives. So we're preaching freedom and liberty to the people who are captives, and thinking of people who are in bondage and chains. Now, the interesting thing about these words and how this is described in the Bible, the captive isn't just someone who's in chains. And that deliverance, the word used there, gives you the indication that this is someone who's in bondage because they probably worked themselves into that status. This is not someone who's being necessarily kidnapped, right? This is someone who may have earned this status that they're in. And so, and it's important, hold that, because that's important to what he's going to say next in the next couple of lines. The status that they're in, and I'm not going to say it's one that they deserve, but it's one that they got themselves into. And so what he's doing is preaching deliverance. I'm coming to tell you you're free. Yes, you may have worked your way into prison. Yes, you may have abused people and the judgment has been severe. Yes, you may have broken the law, but now you're free. And not just free, but the other word that I have here is pardon. You're free and your slate is clean. There will be no history of these offenses. There will be no recollection of this conviction. You're free. As my pastor likes to say from that commercial, free. He says that all the time. But that's the kind of free that this message is bringing. So the herald is announcing to them, you're free, delivered, completely wiped clean. Next, and recovering of sight to the blind. Recovering indicates that it's been lost, right? So, and blind, the image that it has is a hazy, blocked off, can't see through vision. And what it puts me in the mind of is, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, when they eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that knowledge is what we learn based on what we see. And now, even though we see, we don't see. We see what we see with our natural eye. But all through the Bible, it's full of revelations from God because we didn't see. We didn't understand what was right before us. We could not recognize him moving. We could not recognize his hand. We could not recognize his will. But Jesus has come to recover that sight so that we can see, so that we now recognize our Father when he's before us. And so giving us back that sight so that we are not operating in our own knowledge of what is good and what is evil, but that we see what God desires for us. And next, to set at liberty them that are bruised. These are the oppressed. So again, he's freeing people. You're freeing the people who've earned their captivity. And then you're freeing the people who are being held against their will, the oppressed. And then finally, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. And that's what I was talking about. Pay attention to these people, because that is a reference to the year of Jubilee, which is found in, if we go to Leviticus, the 25th chapter, the 9th verse. Very interesting. I was like, oh, we don't have any comparisons with the Old and the New Testament, but actually with what Jesus is speaking, he's going back and forth the whole time. So in the year of Jubilee, it was part of the law that was given to the children of Israel and how they should handle one another. So if we start with the 9th verse, there was the year of Jubilee would be a 50th year. So there would be 7 sevens, which would be 49 years. And at the start of the 50th year, similar to like the Pentecost in the counting, on that 50th year, it says in the 9th verse, then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee, it shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. Okay. Now, and it goes into greater detail how to execute this. So a couple of things to point out about this year of Jubilee, because that's what the herald or the preaching in Jesus, that's who it is announcing, right? The acceptable year of the Lord. So what does that mean? God had set aside a time where everything could be reset. You would get back the things that had belonged to you. You would be given back your freedom, and you would let the land rest. Now, the problem is the children of Israel weren't really doing this like they should, which God had now decided to rectify. And so what he's saying is, I'm freeing everyone that is a captive. I am restoring everything that needs to be restored. I've sent him to do this for you. And the reason why I read about them not sowing and them not reaping what grows of itself is the year of Jubilee was a year that you lived on the abundance of the goodness of God. And so what Jesus is declaring is that this is the time where you're really getting ready, if you catch what the herald is calling, to live off the abundance of the goodness of God. And that abundance is better for you than what you would have sown anyway. The problem is we as people don't trust God to do so. And so it's hard when someone owes you a debt to say, I'm going to forgive that debt and let God provide for me what I needed that debt was going to pay for. You have to trust God to do that. You have to have faith in him to do that. You have to have the love of him in your heart to look at someone that owes you an excessive amount, or to look at someone who has committed a crime against you and say, I'm going to forgive that crime and let it go and not pursue you for restitution. I'm going to trust God to work this out. And so what Jesus is calling out, and what the prophet Isaiah wrote in his book or his scroll, is that there's going to come a time when God is going to do this. We haven't done it, but he's going to do it. And Jesus is coming now to tell them, we're going to do this now. Okay? And so if you think about all the things that he is reading and that the prophet Isaiah declared, it's a significant message. It sounds good. If you've been in the church, for years, you've heard this read multiple times. But have you ever really thought about the magnitude of what was being said? And when I talk about declaring things, him pronouncing the truth of this now. And it says in the 20th verse, and I'm making sure I got all my notes. In the 20th verse, and he closed the book, and he gave it again to the minister and sat down. And the eyes of all them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. And he began to say unto them, this day is this scripture fulfilled in your ears. Today is this fulfilled in your ears. So this is now. We're going to do this now. And here he is. So he stood to read, and he sat down, and he begins to teach. Now you can continue reading on and see that they weren't, and it's heartbreaking, but that's the way we are. When the herald comes, when the message comes, we don't want to hear it. And so he is preaching freedom. He is preaching freedom from everything. And one of the questions I wrote down in my notes is, what is really oppressing you? Because you think it's your boss, okay? You think it's, your bills or whatever other worldly things we've wrapped ourselves up in. But what is really holding you down is your lack of faith in God. Because if you would let go of those things and allow him to work it out, what Jesus is saying is, I've brought freedom for all of that. I've brought wholeness to you. I've brought, for those who were poor, for those who were less than and not considered worthy of things, he's brought good news. Really, really, really good news. But we don't receive it. And so the significance of this is Jesus is declaring that now is the time. This is a year of Jubilee. Everyone can be made free. And not just a year of Jubilee, but a period of Jubilee. And so if you remember in the Leviticus book, it says when the trumpet sounds. And so again, that thought of the herald, right? When he cried out and started calling out this teaching, that was the sound letting the world know that the time is here for everyone to be made free. So, oh, if you go back and continue to read in Isaiah 61, it was the promise of hope for Zion, but it also tells you afterwards why. And that God was making trees of righteousness. He was planting things that should grow up and show what was right according to him. And so if you allow the herald, who's Jesus, the one calling, to make you free, and God plants you in him, when you grow up, you're a witness to the world what is right and good. And so, it would behoove us to listen. It's a really good idea to catch him in what he's saying. So, if we go back to our lesson aims, it says, understand the particular significance of what Jesus read in the synagogue at Nazareth. The significance of it, I think I've clearly explained, if you dive into the words and the meanings of what Jesus was saying, that his message was targeted toward them. And he went to Nazareth. I told you, Nazareth was not a hot spot. And remember, I said he was talking to the poor and the brokenhearted and the captive. They were kind of raggedy people in the eyes of some folk. And what is your Sunday school book has in here when they said, does anything good come out of Nazareth? It was not a great esteemed place, but the good news went to them. And so it says, be motivated to explore our spiritual gifts. So the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. He was anointed to do a work. Once we are in him, we're supposed to do a work. And it says, and consider what God may want us to do with our lives. And look at the work that he was doing. He was freeing. He was delivering. He was making whole. He wasn't pursuing his ambitions, his desires in life. He wasn't looking for his next come up. His work that the Spirit anointed him for was for God's people. And then it says, create a list of our spiritual gifts with ways that God can use each of these gifts. Now, that's going to take some time. But a place you can start, if you want to work on this, which everybody should want to work on this, is 1 Corinthians 12. If you start at, let's see, verse 4. And I'm going to read this to you. And if you've listened to me before, I'm kind of Team Paul, because I really enjoy how he explains things. And so if we start 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter, the 4th verse, and I'm going to read till 11. Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of administrations, but the same Lord. And there are diversities of operations, but it is the same God, which worketh all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. Now, what that is telling you is that there are a variety of gifts, but they all come from the same Spirit, okay? And then it says there are differences in administrations, how we execute those gifts. So you may have the gift, we'll talk about them. You may have the same gift as the person across the aisle from you, but how each of you works in that gift may be different. But it says each of you are subject to the same Lord, okay? And there are diversities of operations. It's the same God, okay? And so where and how you work, it's the same God. And the point of it is to serve everybody, to benefit everybody. And it's very important that we understand that, because you hear so much, he's working it out for my good. No, he's not. He's working it out for our good. It's us. Your good don't happen without my good. Not in the kingdom, okay? So just remember that. It's for my good. It's for me. No. It's for the good, okay? And because of that, we need to understand that these gifts that you have, if it's only benefiting you, it's not a gift of the Spirit. If it's only benefiting your kids, it's not a gift of the Spirit. It's you gifting yourself. And we don't want to do that, okay? And I'm not saying it's okay. It's not okay to want things for yourself. But understand that when we really trust God, he'll take care of you. When you really do and you believe that his will is for the good, then you know that you will get all that he has for you if you do all that he wants you to do. So let's continue on. For to one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge by the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another the gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another diverse kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But all these worketh that one and the selfsame Spirit, dividing to every man severally as he will. So each of us can have a different gift, a word of wisdom, a word of knowledge, the gift of healing, the gift of interpretation, All of these things are given to us by the Spirit, and we work in them differently. We work in them at different times. We use them for different reasons, but our whole purpose is the benefit of all and to bring it about God's will, okay? And it is his Spirit that distributes those gifts out amongst us for his purpose. And so as you're thinking about what your spiritual gifts are and what God wants you to do with those spiritual gifts, I'm going to tell you right now, I already told you what he wants you to do with them. He wants you to work his will. So let's just mark that off the list, okay? Do what he wants done with the gifts and do them to his glory, because the whole purpose is for the good of all. So I think that is it for the lesson. So I hope that explains what Jesus was reading and why he was reading it. I will add also that when you think about what Jesus was doing, um, none of what he did on earth was for his own purpose. He did all of that for us. And so when you think about someone working, if it were his example, then you're thinking about someone now working in their gift. Again, it's like I said, it's not for your own gain. We're supposed to have the mind of Christ. And you shouldn't think that it is a loss to you to give up where you are and what you're doing to pursue the will of God. And that's what your gift in him should do. So now that's it for the lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to hear my testimony, I'm gonna start that now. Okay. So as I was thinking about gifts, I don't know if I've said this in Sunday school or not before, but I work in hospice. And I've been doing this about 6.5 years. And on top of that, I'm a caregiver. So I spend a lot of time with the sick and the dying, working for the sick and the dying, or working for the sick and the recovering, right? Which is my family. And so I also work in home teams. So all of the patients that I serve are patients who have decided to live out the duration of their illness in their homes. And so it's a challenging but fulfilling work. But it's challenging because I also work in the community that is probably least desirable in Louisville. And a lot of people really don't want to be bothered with it. For a variety of reasons. It's the most diverse community, lots of international people and immigrants, lots of people of color, lots of people who are of a lower socioeconomic status, lots of people who smoke, lots of people who drink, lots of people. We have the highest percentage of what we call drug diversions in the homes, where we have to be careful with prescription medicines. There are just lots of challenges and obstacles that that can be a deterrent. And please don't think that those things don't exist everywhere, but it is more prevalent in the community that I work on. And it's not an obstacle for me to keep me from working there, but it is a challenge to make it harder to reach the goals. And one of the issues that I deal with a lot is food shortage. And so for a person to visit a food bank, right, you must have transportation. You must be able to carry your box of commodities and take it home. But for a person who's dying, that's not quite possible, right? For a person to go to a food bank, you have to be able to stand in the line, right? You have to be able to make contact with them, show proof of address and identity, things. There are lots of things that are required. And I'm not saying that, those systems in place don't have a purpose. But what most people will recognize is that when there's a system in place, it's exclusion to some people. And so for anyone that has a challenge and doesn't have the resources, they can't meet those requirements. And the sick and the dying are one of them. And so part of my job is finding a solution, right? And trying to help them make connections with different food banks. And it's hard. And so I found a charity, and I sent a volunteer to the charity to pick up the food and to deliver it to the homes that needed it. The volunteer went multiple times, and each time the volunteer was like, this is a problem. I had to stand in line in the rain. I had to stand in line in the cold. I had to do this. I had to do that. They need to do this. They need to do that. But the volunteer kept going. Then one day I get a picture of a whole set up, organized line of groceries and boxes and everything. And the volunteer had decided they'd had enough. They got out of the line, went into the food bank, signed up to volunteer, and showed them how to restructure their process, worked the line, brought it down, picked up the food that was for the families that I needed, and went and delivered it. And now the volunteer works there once a week. And I gave that testimony because this person had the gift of wisdom. Because they walked into the situation and they saw what was wrong. And sometimes we look at something and we see a need and we'll walk away. But this person stopped what they were doing, went in, they didn't gripe and moan and say, this is beneath me, I don't want to be bothered with these people. They went in and did the work. Why? Like I said when I read it, it's all different gifts from the same spirit, but the purpose is to benefit all, right? What God put in that person was not for his benefit. It was for the benefit of the people that were in that line. It was for the benefit of the people whose home I was sending them to. It was for the benefit of the people who've been working at that food bank for a long, long time and not getting anywhere because they didn't have enough help. And so when you're thinking about your spiritual gifts, know that they may or may not look like what you think they should look like. However, they are the gift of God for you to the world. And they're for the benefit of people that you probably didn't even know were going to benefit from what he had put in you. So there is this week's short story / life application testimony. I hope it made sense. I hope it helped you understand the recovering of sight to the blind, the healing of the brokenhearted, the liberty for the captives. I hope you really think about that as you are processing your interactions throughout the week, living for the Lord, that you understand that what God has anointed you to do is for the benefit of so many people, and many of them you haven't even met yet. So God bless you. Enjoy your weekend. I will see you all next week for another lesson. Thank you very much for joining me.